Alright, how's it going, y'all? So today, this is going to be my review of the new DS923 Plus, which quite honestly is probably one of the most well-awaited reviews of a NAS. Everybody on the internet has been very excited about this NAS because of the fact that it is the replacement to the 920 Plus, which was pretty much, in my experience, the most sold NAS from like a hobbyist to somewhat professional user. The majority of people bought the 920 Plus. It was a great unit, well loved by everybody pretty much, and so this right here is the replacement for it. And to give a very quick, just really brief overview of my experience with it, is I think this is a great upgrade to the 920 Plus for the majority of users. I think most people who buy this thing will be absolutely happy with its performance and all of its capability they can do. It's got 3 real upgrades from its predecessor that all add really nice features, I believe. However, it is a downgrade for one specific user group, and those are Plex users who care about hardware transcoding. It is any users who have Plex, have the Plex Pass, or also you're using Video Station, you care about hardware transcoding. Hardware transcoding is where you have a GPU, basically a graphics card, transcode your video rather than a CPU. So that way you can essentially transcode a lot easier and a lot faster with a GPU than you can with a CPU. And so this unit, unlike its predecessor which had it, does not have an Intel QuickSync CPU in it. Instead, it has an AMD Ryzen CPU in it. But other than those users, I think that this is a very solid upgrade, but there are some concerning things that Synology has done with this that I do want to talk about later on this video. It's kind of questioning the path forward that Synology will be taking. Alright, so now with that out of the way, let's actually kind of go over some basics of the video. Alright, so first off, Synology sent me this product for free. I believe I have to return it. They do not get to see this review ahead of time or anything like that. They've got no editorial input into this review at all. They just sent me the product and said, go nuts, whatever I want to do. So that out of the way, it's an unbiased review. And this right here is the DS923 Plus. It is a 4-bay NAS that can either take 3.5 or 2.5-inch SSDs. Either one of those can fit in this. Essentially, it's designed to take 3.5-inch hard drives, but it comes with little adapter screws that allow you to slot in a regular 2.5-inch SATA SSD. This is a NAS with 4 bays on the front, and it's got 2 M.2 NVMe SSD slots on the bottom, down here. This is a huge turning place for Synology, these 2 slots, because this is the very first time on a Synology NAS you have ever been able to build a volume through DSM and supported by Synology and all that stuff on a M.2 NVMe SSD. So this right here is one of those SSDs. You can slot it in and build a volume. That has a massive asterisk on it, however, and that is that you have to build it with Synology M.2 NVMe SSDs. And I want to talk about that. But I'm going to save that for kind of the end of this video because that's really one of the things that's like the looking ahead isms. But just know you have to put a Synology M.2 NVMe SSD in this thing. And in all honesty, DSM 7.1 is not ready and not really optimized for it at all. It still reports them as a cache device, even if you've got the volume. I'm going to talk about that in a dedicated video a lot more and how the experience is. But just know, to do it through the GUI, to do it in a supported way, there's no possible way to build the volume through the GUI with a non-Synology M.2 NVMe SSD. It comes with 4 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM ECC, and it is upgradable to 32 gigabytes of DDR4 ECC RAM via 2 different DIMM slots. So it is completely user upgradable, which is always nice, and 4 gigabytes for most NASs is totally fine. Very rarely do I recommend clients actually upgrade past 4 gigabytes unless they're doing very specific use cases, just because Synology operates quite well with limited RAM. So now if we go into the back, we will see that it does not have an inbuilt power supply. Instead, it has a power brick. It's actually a lot smaller than DS1522 Plus's power brick, but it does not have an inbuilt power supply. I know a lot of people like an inbuilt power supply, but this unit's never had an inbuilt power supply, and it's a high quality one. In reality with Synology's, I've not heard of a lot of people having power supply failures, external or internal, at least not in the past few years. So I'd say you don't really have too much to worry about that with that, but it is still so much cleaner if you've got an inbuilt power supply. The thing you've got is you've got a single USB 3.1 Whatever the 5 gigabit version of USB is, they keep changing the naming convention, so it's quite confusing. You've got one on here and one on the front as well. And you've also got two 1 gigabit ports on there, which a lot of people, including myself, were going to hope that they were going to be 2.5 gigabit. But instead of that, we've got this guy right here, in which currently the only card you can put in there is Synology's proprietary E10G22 T1 Mini. It is essentially a very small 10 gigabit add-in card that plugs into a custom board with a custom PCIe slot down there. It is remarkably easy to install, which is a plus, but it is proprietary and it's $160, which is roughly $40 more expensive than you expect to pay for a good 10 gigabit card. So there is a cost premium to that. I've already got a video that goes over that card and kind of how I feel about it, but overall it's at least adds benefits to the user because it's really easy to install and it fits and keeps the form factor a lot smaller. So at least there is some benefit to it. The unit itself is incredibly quiet. The noise you will be hearing from this unit will be from the hard drives, which obviously Synology cannot do anything about. Whatever hard drives you put in here is what you're going to be hearing. If you do put SSDs in this thing, you're not really going to be able to hear anything at all coming from this unit. The fan noise is very, very, very quiet. The final thing it does have on the back is, other than a Kensington lock if you need that, is it has a expansion port. It's an eSATA port, which allows this to be hooked up to a 5-bay expansion unit. I've said it in past videos and I'll say it again. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the 5-bay add-in ports. I just don't think they add a lot of value considering their cost. They're like $450 US, and this unit right here with everything in it is only $600. So there is not a great cost option for using it. So I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of that, but it is nice to have it, and that's how you get the 9 out of 923 Plus. Hard drive slots are very easy to use. They've got a little lock on the front like all other Synologies. Just flip it up and pull it out. These are the flip-up versions that were also on the 920 Plus, not the push-in pop-out versions like you see on some of the bigger units. Doesn't matter too much, it's one way or the other. This looks a little prettier, I guess. It looks pretty slick, and so I guess that's why they're going with it. All right, so now with that out of the way, let's talk about this and let's start comparing it to other Synology units in brief. So this one is essentially slotted in right now between the 720 Plus, but we're assuming that the 720 Plus is probably going to have an upgrade, which is the 2-bay unit, and it is between the 1522 Plus. And so this unit is remarkably similar to the 1522 Plus. The 1522 Plus has the exact same CPU as this unit does. It just has one additional bay, comes stock with 4 additional extra gigs of RAM, so it's a single 8 gig DIMM rather than a single 4 gig DIMM like on this device. And it also does not have the ability for that NVMe volume. More on that later. I don't know why that unit does not have it, considering how this is essentially identical to that unit, but it does have it. I have no clue why they did that, other than to say 23 models can do it and 22 models can't. That might honestly be why they did it. And so this unit also does cost $100 less than the 1522 Plus. So that's kind of where we're sitting at from a value standpoint. I think that this is going to be a great unit overall, but the 1522 Plus is not that much more expensive and does come with those 2 benefits I mentioned earlier. If you're buying the Synology RAM, the RAM upgrade alone for the 1522 Plus almost covers the upgrade. Synology 4 gig DIMMs can be like $80, which is highway robbery, absolutely. Apple doesn't even charge you that for 4 gigs of RAM. That's what's saying something. So this right here is a hard place to be, but I do still think a lot of people are going to enjoy this unit. All right, so now with that all out of the way, let's go in and let's open this guy up and start talking about its capabilities and look through its stats pieces and talk about those other things we've had. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on, and you are going to hear some clunk of the hard drives because I've got some 16 terabyte Iron Wolf Pros in here, which are not quiet, but you're just going to have to live with that, unfortunately. All right, so now we're up and running. I apologize about the noise. You're going to hear this thing go clackety, clackety, clack. I'm sure you can hear it, and I apologize for that. But I wanted it in shot. I'm going to move it a little bit out of shot just so you don't hear it as much. Because those hard drives that I put in it are not quiet. So essentially right up here, this part of the video is going to be talking about some of the performance And I'm not gonna go as in depth as I did with the 1522 Plus review because it's essentially identical to the 1522 Plus. This unit has the exact same CPU, add-in card, everything as the 1522 Plus. So if you really want an in-depth performance guide, I would really look at that. I do a lot of specific testing of the CPU's capability, which allows you to kind of say, oh hey, how many videos can you actually render? How many photos can you render? All that kind of stuff. So I will leave that in the description. I'll also try to say exactly where it is in the video. If I fail to do that, please remind me. But I'm not going to go into that as much, though I will pull them up here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to pull up Synology's performance numbers and kind of compare them to my own performance numbers. And so we're going to go down into the most basic one, which is the sequential throughput with a hard drive over SMB, the way that the vast majority of users are going to be actually contacting this NAS. So in here I've got 16 terabyte IronWolf Pros, and they're not on the compatibility list. I'll get to that in a second here. Synology's petty. And so essentially right here we can see it's got read speeds of about 592 megabytes per second and write speeds of 560. And those are very much in line with what I got when I was doing a test. They are very close to being essentially hard drive limited. And so when I was doing my own personal testing, this was pretty much right in line, and I actually got greater than this on the read speeds. Those IronWolf drives had a surprisingly quick readout. I was actually quite impressed by them, and we were in a RAID 5 or an SHR1 mode on those drives. So I ended up getting about 650 to even 700 sometimes when I was doing massive sequential files with this thing, so I was very impressed by that. And so I'm sure Synology was testing it with their hard drives, which might be a little less. Then if we scroll down, we can also see that the difference between a encrypted and a non-encrypted share is minimal. This Ryzen CPU is very quick. Anybody who comments the fact that it's a dual core has just not played with this thing, because it is incredibly snappy compared to what a quad core was 3 years ago. So it is a great CPU in there, which is more than enough for pretty much anybody's NAS usage, unless you're trying to run like a lot of virtual machines or anything. It's going to be way better than what the previous 920 Plus's CPU was capable of. And so operations like rendering photos in PhotoStation and everything like that are going to happen significantly faster. Then finally, this unit has a little trick up its sleeve that no other Synology unit so far has had. And that is the ability to make a volume with an M.2 NVMe SSD. Note, it must be a Synology M.2 NVMe SSD. I'll show you in a minute here. I've tried. It will not work through the GUI. It will not even let you, and that kind of pisses me off a little bit. But we're going to talk about why and kind of the rationale for why Synology is claiming it. There's some valid points they make, but I really wish, especially on this unit, they just let you say, you know what? I trust the manufacturer. I'm fine. But it must be one of their 3400s or the 3410 M.2 NVMe SSDs. And my performance with this was entirely underwhelming. I set up a single unit in this thing, and it was slow. Not slow, but it was really slow for an M.2 NVMe SSD. My write speeds had 100% disk utilization of an NVMe drive, and they were only about 600 megabytes per second. This is a single unit, and it's, I guess, the older one, but it was the 400 gigabyte drive. And then my read speeds were about 850 megabytes per second off that, using majority of disk. I was like, that's not what M.2 NVMe SSDs are capable of. So I believe that one of two things have happened. One, this right here, the drive I've got, Synology sent me a while back. It's a 3400 Synology M.2 NVMe drive, not a 3410. I'm wondering if that device, which was designed, the M.2 NVMe, was designed with the intention that this would only ever be used as a caching device. So I'm legitimately wondering, did they design it with like low overall throughput? Like maybe they did not have any of that lightning fast cache space that SSDs have, because it's like, hey, we're not going to be doing like random writes to this thing. We're not going to be dumping a ton of data to it because it's a SSD. It's just for caching. It's just for fast reads. So I don't know, but it was not good performance. The other thing I believe may have happened is DSM 7.1 might just not be optimized for NVMe SSDs yet, because 100% write utilization, and it was registering at 10,000 IOPS trying to read and write from it on the volume. So I think there might be something going on there that was giving it extra poor performance, but I was underwhelmed by it. What I was really impressed by was the latency. I threw a Final Cut Pro project on there, and it was buttery smooth. That was the one really nice thing I'm going to talk about in a little bit here, but I think this unit might be the perfect starter unit for somebody who's going to be using this as a file server for editing videos from, because you are able to stick two M.2 NVMe SSDs in there, set them up as a RAID 0 group, have them constantly backed up to the hard drives with a BTRFS snapshot, and then you're going to have insanely low latency for your project. So even if you have something like a 1 to 1.5 terabyte project, if you know you're going to be working on that for a few weeks, but you want to make sure you've got access to all your footage, you just stick it on there physically. You don't have to worry about the cache warming up or anything like that, especially since in recent versions of caching on DSM, they've actually kind of gotten worse for video editors, unfortunately. You don't have to worry about any of that, and it will be lightning fast. The latency was unbelievably low. It felt great. So I'm really happy with that, and that's really what you want an M.2 NVMe SSD volume to have. It's really nice, and so if you've got any Docker containers that often are having databases and things like that, you can stick them on there, and that is going to be super nice. I'm really excited about this feature. I'm not loving how it's implemented right now, but it gives me a lot of hope, and it's something I've really been wanting for a while now. I'm definitely going to be doing a dedicated video on that. There's a lot of dedicated videos I need to be doing about this because there's a lot of specifics, but I will be having one there because NVMe's are so much faster than standard drives. All right, so now while we're on the subject of this, I gotta show you what it's like building the volume. So I'm just gonna go quickly blow away the volume that I've got in here. And while that's doing it, I can also kind of show you how DSM-7 is just not designed for thinking that drives would be sequential. So right here, we should be able to go see the benchmark I had on here. It does not even give us a throughput value for a M.2 NVMe. There's no reason why you not have this if you're assuming that you've actually got the volumes on there, but I did this test this morning, and yeah, we got IOPS, which are insanely high IOPS, but throughput was not added in there. So that is, I guess they're like, well, you don't care about throughput because all that matters is latency and IOPS. But now they have the ability to make the volume, I'm hoping they add it in there. I think there's a lot of quirks in here, and I think they were honestly waiting for DSM 7.2 to come out to add in the NVMe support. That's what I'm guessing, because there's a lot of half-baked features in here in 7.1 when you're having a volume. All right, so now that that is not initialized, let's go through the process and build a storage pool. So right here, I'm gonna set it up as a basic, just so that way we don't have any possible overhead or anything like that. And here it gives us our first warning of many that M.2 NVMe SSDs do not support hot swapping. That is because essentially it's a PCIe device, which comes down to the fact that if you remove a PCIe device from the system is not going to handle that. It's actually, I think the reason they're arguing that they are only going to allow Synology NVMe drives to build a volume, because there is a kernel of truth there. If you have a PCIe device like an NVMe drive all of a sudden completely disconnect, generally the system will not handle that. It can cause issues and hard crashes and file corruption. Not just file corruption on the volume you're working on, but file corruption across, just because it can start sending junk data out. So there are legitimate reasons why they've got it there. At least there's that kernel of legitimate truth. I really wish that Synology would have a way that you could say, listen, I know the risks. I'm trusting the vendor. I am going to be okay with it. Even if it was something through terminal that you had to type in. And that way that Synology can easily argue that if somebody's going through and typing in terminal and saying, yes, I understand, then we can say, yeah, they've done their homework and they know enough to be dangerous. You still can, I will be doing that in that other M.2 NVMe SSD video where you can just allow it, but I'm worried about those persisting through updates and things like that. But right here, it's gonna say, hey, do not unplug it, do not try to hot swap it. It is not a hot swappable drive. And right here, when we try to build it, you can see I've got two drives in here. One of them is an Ironwolf NVMe SSD, and it will not let us do anything with it other than make it as an SSD cache. So here's the learn more section, and it's gonna talk about how really we're protecting you. These SSDs have been thoroughly tested to ensure that they can operate in storage pools and remain within the operating temperature range. So they are claiming that they are protecting you because if you've got it as an actual drive, it can start overheating, and if it all of a sudden leaves, you don't want to get corruption. That's what they're claiming. The thing is, their SSDs are so freaking expensive. I know I'm knocking them a lot for forcing them to have this. I still do think it's a great thing, and I'm really glad they added in the feature. I just wish they opened it up more. All right, so now we're gonna say, all right, well, we can't do that. So let's go on and just make it the volume. And we're gonna skip the drive check because I already did it. And just like that, we've got our storage pool and we can create a volume within it. All right, and so just like that, yeah, it builds like any other volume, which is great. The thing is, let's go over to the resource monitor. And we can see that even though drive 2 is in fact volume 2, it is a volume, it's still called cache drive. That's just one of those things where they're gonna have to clean this up because this was clearly DSM 7.1 was not written with the assumption that you would have an NVMe SSD. They must have added a hot fix to it to just get it to barely work, but it is not built in like that. But essentially you can do everything you can with a regular volume, which is really great. The recommended use case I would have for this, and I'm gonna do this probably in a video in a little bit here, is essentially have this be a scratch volume. Set up as RAID 0 or just have a single drive in there and then send BTRFS snapshots to your main volume hourly. That way you can get all the speed benefit of knowing there's one really fast section of disk and then you get the protection of your RAID via the main bays. And so it's a great way to just run fast and loose and really not have to take up that much more space because the NVMe drives are a lot smaller, obviously, than your big old 16 terabyte hard drives. All right, so now a couple of other things. Synology's compatibility list with their hard drives. Let's see if I got that here. So right here is the Synology compatibility list for the hard drives in the system, and they are refusing to add these 16 terabyte Iron Wolf drives. They will add up to a 12 terabyte Iron Wolf drive, but they will not add the 16 terabyte Iron Wolf drive. It's petty. If you look at the 18, oh, only Synology has 18 terabyte drives. They've also not added in the 20 terabyte Iron Wolf drives. They've really they're like, hey, if you want to use somebody else, you've got to use us. The one place they will allow a Seagate 16 terabyte drive is actually in the surveillance drives because those are specific purpose. Those are those Skyhawk drives. Then they also added in that Toshiba drive. Toshiba actually makes the Synology drives, so I'm assuming that is why. But yeah, so technically these drives that I put in there are not on the compatibility list, even though they totally are fine and they just give you a slight warning. This is not that issue that we've seen in the past with the greater than 8 bay units, so like the 12 bay units. This is not that. This gives you a very small warning when you do it and says, hey, these drives are not on the compatibility list, just FYI. And then after that you say yes, and we can see that I built it and yet the volume is still green, which is good. If this was a 12 bay unit and I did this, the volume would be yellow and say, warning, you did something bad. Here it just gives you that one warning. It's much, much, much softer. All right, and so finally I want to close out this video talking about the overall raw performance of this thing, and it's pretty good. So this AMD Ryzen R1600 that is in this unit and is also in the 1522 Plus unit, it is fast. It solidly beats out competition. This is way older competition, but it beats it by almost twice as much in a lot of cases. It really makes a big difference. This is so much better of a unit. This is a great CPU. I know there's going to be a lot of people disappointed by the fact that this unit did not have an Intel CPU in there, but I am really glad for the majority of users who are just using the NAS, and as a file server, and as a photo station, and a lot of things like that, everything but that video station. They really, really are going to get a lot of value out of it. It is very powerful and a very low power draw as well. So those things together make it a great unit. I'm going to do a dedicated video on the difference between this and the 1522 Plus because I do think that there is a really tough decision to be made there. Previously, the 15 lines were a lot different, but in this case, this unit and that unit kind of are merged together, and it's kind of not necessarily like different features, but just how many bays you want. And so there's going to be a big debate there on what's best for you. But in reality, the majority of people who buy this device are going to be very happy. It's only $50 more expensive than its predecessor, and if you calculate that for inflation, it's pretty good, and it's got a lot more capability in it. It does worry me though that the direction Synology is going in, where they are starting to add in lockdown features that are actually on consumer devices, which I do not love at all, specifically when it comes to one, proprietary add-in card, and two, the fact that you can only build an NVMe volume with a Synology M.2 NVMe drive in there. But other than that, if you're just looking at this as is it a good unit? Is it a good Synology? I'd say yes. It's absolutely a great Synology at a really good price. All right, so that's gonna be it for this video. Go and leave any other tutorials or anything else you'd like me to test on this thing in the comments below, and have a good one. Bye.